So what are we meant to do with those repugnant bits of the Bible? You know, those bits that we really dislike and will never, ever accept. And quite rightly so. What are we meant to do with them? I really am going to answer that question tonight. Hi, I'm Warren, the rector here at St. Columba's. Glad you could join me for my message of the day. I started with that same question last week, but actually I never quite got to answering the question because I talked about the alternative to having repugnant bits. What would a Bible look like if we had no repugnant bits in it? And I worked through a couple of the alternatives, both of which are unsatisfactory. And there's some good reasons why we have a Bible that does have repugnant bits, just like there are repugnant bits of human history. Yep, that's what the Bible's like. But when we come to those parts of the Bible that are repugnant, what are we meant to do with them? Do we just not read them? Do we just exclude them? Well, sometimes, yes. Sometimes that's what we do. There are times to read some parts of the Bible and times not to read them. And that's not unreasonable. But that's not to exclude them from Scripture itself for the reasons I gave last week. The important thing to remember about the Bible is that not every single bit of it we approach in the same way. So, for instance, I approach, when Jesus says, for instance, to love your neighbour as yourself or something like that, I treat that differently than I might do something else which, from other parts of the Bible, which is talking about let's go out and kill people or something. They're not to be treated in the same way. They're both to be worked, but they're worked differently. Now, that's a little bit tricky because if you haven't learned how to do this, you just read it as one solid text, the whole of the Bible, and think that the whole thing should be interpreted the same way. And that's not what we do. We've never done that in the church, and we're never going to do that in the church. The very structure of the Bible tells you that, shows you that, you know, the importance of everything leading up to Jesus, and then beyond him, you know, Jesus is that key moment in Scripture. So obviously we treat what he says in a way differently than some of the other parts of the Bible, which are, we just think, so irreconcilable to Jesus. In fact, that's one of the reading strategies that we have in the church. It's like we use the death and resurrection of Jesus, his life, death and resurrection, as a pair of spectacles. And then we can look back and read the history of that we find in Scripture that leads up to Jesus with these spectacles on, and that gives it a different light. Now, there are some parts of that story which we're reading from the past which we're never going to use as the spectacles to read Jesus, to do it the other way around. Never. It's always Jesus through whom we read the rest of Scripture. That's just one of the techniques we use, but there are other things that we do. Now, if you want to learn about that, you're going to have to come to church. You're going to have to learn how to do it. Come to groups, hear some sermons, see how the liturgy itself starts to sort Scripture for us and how we do that as a church. And we do that in a way that has been handed on to us for the last 2,000 years. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.